Welcome to the second of two presentations. My name is Todd Eisenstadt. I represent the Center for Environmental Policy at the School of Public Affairs. This is a presentation co-sponsored with the School of International Service and also with the World Bank. We are here today to speak about transparency in a time of crisis and long-term growth in the Middle East and North Africa. We're very privileged this afternoon to have one of the co-authors of the report that you all have received upon registering for this event. That report is How Transparency Can Help the Middle East and North Africa. So we're joined by Dr. Asif Islam, who's a senior economist in the Middle East and North Africa Chief Economist's Office of the World Bank. We also have with us School of International Service Professor Tamar Gutner, who also has experience recently working at the International Monetary Fund's Independent Evaluation Office. So we'd like to welcome you all, encourage you to submit questions through the Zoom modality if you have them. We will spend about a half hour hearing from Dr. Islam. Then we will have about 10 minutes from Dr. Gutner, and we will then open up the floor, as it were, for discussion and take your questions. Thank you very much for joining us, and I turn the floor, please, to Dr. Islam.
Thank you, Professor Eisenstadt. I am now going to try and share my presentation.
It worked.
All right, great. Hello, everyone. Thank you for coming to my presentation on economic growth and data transparency in the Middle East and North Africa. My name is Asif Islam. I am a senior economist at the World Bank MENA Chief Economist Office. This is part of a series of presentations, part of the second one of two presentations on the findings of our recently released MENA economic update on how transparency can help the Middle East and North Africa. So to get right off the bat, this is one quote we have in our report. It goes as follows: when you lose people's trust, even when you tell the truth, people won't believe you. This comes from the region, and it's with regards to the response to the COVID-19 crisis. And this brings to light an important issue of transparency, or as we pitch as data transparency in the region. It implies that there's a long-standing issue that's now manifesting itself in a very, very tricky manner on the ground. So regarding long-standing issues, there are two things I will discuss in my presentation. One is the issue of data transparency and reliability, and the other is the low economic growth in the region. So to set the scene, one thing we observe within the region is its low GDP per capita growth. And this is what you can see visualized on the right-hand side. This is the GDP per capita growth rates from 2000 to 2022, forecasting 2 years into the future. The blue diamonds represents each country's in the region's GDP per capita growth, and the horizontal red bars are the median growth rates for their respective income groups. The main takeaway point from this is that most economies in the region underperform. And note, this is a very mediocre benchmark. We're looking at the median growth rates for each income group. The main takeaway point from this is that the region has been underperforming. And this is a challenge we think will persist into the future with very few exceptions. So our main hypothesis, what we want to explore is data transparency part of this story? We know a couple of things. First, we know there's a widening data gap between MENA and advanced economies. We know that advanced economies have modern, well-coordinated data systems. We know that most of this data is available to researchers. A lot more institutions are engaged. Media and civil society is also involved. We also know that many economies in the MENA region have lagged in their capacity to generate data. And as I just stated, transparency is also more important when these systems are under stress. This is based on the idea that credibility is crucial too, and it's really based on trust, which needs to be forged through transparency. The other important thing we know is that that countries have more responsibility to collect their data. We know this from the UN SDGs, where the responsibility of a lot of the data collection for the indicators has fallen on countries to generate this data. So the main story, or the main thing we want to explore, is can we establish a link between data transparency, reliability, and economic growth? Now, I'm going to just summarize my key messages and outline my presentation going forward. The key messages are that, one, as just shown, MENA has suffered from a chronic low growth syndrome. Second is it's the only region, developing region, to fall in data reliability between 2005 and 2018. And if you take our estimates to heart, our estimations indicate about a loss of 7 to 14% of GDP per capita due to this fall in data reliability and transparency. So for the rest of the presentation, what I'll do is I will go through the state of data transparency in the region. I will then link it to economic growth, and then I'll provide two illustrations of data challenges in the region. So how do we capture data transparency and reliability? Well, the World Bank produces something called the Statistical Capacity Index, which we interpret to imply data transparency and reliability. What it does is it captures three things. One is the availability and periodicity of microdata. This includes administrative data too. The other is the adherence to the data systems to international standards, think national accounts. And finally is the timeliness and the periodicity of about 10 socioeconomic macro indicators. So what you have on your left-hand side graph is a fitted line for 149 developing countries relating the overall statistical capacity score with the level of development. This is for 2005. On the right-hand side, we repeat the same, but we do it for 2018. And there are two main things that should come out of these graphs. The first is this seems to be a positive correlation between the level of development and statistical capacity. The second is that the Middle East and North Africa is the only region to have declined in the score between these two time periods. And in fact, it now scores the lowest. There is considerable variation within the region when it comes to this indicator. On one hand, we have Egypt and Iran on the right-hand side doing well, fairly well. And on the left-hand side, we have economies such as Libya, Syria, and Yemen. The one thing that should strike you right away is that it seems countries that are in more fragile and conflict situations are the ones with lower scores. And this is true, but there are also many economies that are not in conflict that don't perform well with this score in the region. So how do we think data transparency and reliability relates to economic growth? Well, we have thought of three main mechanisms. They can be more. Our first mechanism is the idea that good policy and reforms depend on credible and timely data. This is based on the idea that your policies are as good as the empirical evidence they're based on. Fundamentally, data is about records. One way I like to think about this as a parallel example is to think about a business that's trying to raise profits. The manager typically has to benchmark their performance with their past as well as with their competitors. They have to leverage collateral. They have to balance risk and reward as they try new ventures. All of this requires really good record keeping. The other idea we have is that when data is accessible to broader civil society, it can possibly generate better policies and reforms. The idea is that when you have more actors, more agents involved in testing hypotheses, debating and disputing findings, you're more likely to establish a robust set of facts and relationships. And hopefully this will result in the best ideas to emerge. And then finally, when data is of questionable quality and it's not available, there is a chance that the gap between perceptions and reality may grow. This means that governments that embark on welfare improving reforms may have little impact on public perceptions because there's very little data tracking these improvements. The fear you have is this could manifest itself in terms of social protests and unrests. And more importantly, once a government walks down this path, it may be very difficult to regain credibility. So this is an overview of the process we envision. A country's ability to generate data will determine the degree, the quality of the raw data they have. Then academics, policymakers, and think tanks can take this raw data and transform it into information that is more easily digestible. Hopefully they will debate the findings among themselves, and then the media will step in and take this information and communicate it to the public. And the hope here is also that the public takes ownership of this debate, and the end result should be an optimal set of policies. So now into a bit of technicalities on how we try to relate data transparency and economic growth. We try two types of estimations, and these are pretty much determined by what sort of data transformation we do. The first is a cross-sectional estimation, where we take the growth of GDP per capita from 2005 to 2018 and regress it to the levels of the data capacity score in 2005, the level of GDP per capita in 2005, including various other controls. For the panel estimations, we do something similar, but now our data varies across time and across countries. So we take the growth of GDP per capita, we regress it on the level of statistical capacity, the initial GDP per capita, as well as other controls. The fact that it's a panel estimation allows us to account for time effects, and we also account for random country effects. We also include another specification where we lag our main variable, which is the data capacity score, as well as all the other covariates. Our sample varies a bit. It goes from 98 to 136 economies, depending on what controls we include. This is between 2005 and 2018, which is the range of when the index is available. For some countries, the data is sporadic. Now, with these estimations, you have two concerns. One, you have this concern of simultaneity bias that comes from the fact that you think there might be reverse causality. One can imagine a situation whereby countries that are growing faster and are more developed are more able to have better data systems. So this could basically propose a relationship on the other direction. The second issue you have is one of omitted variable bias. If you're not accounting for the most important determinants of growth, you could produce biased estimates. So regarding the first, we try to limit it as much as we can. For the cross-sectional analysis, we have growth of GDP per capita far off into the future, 2005 to 2018, while looking at the 2000 levels of each of the other covariates. For the panel data, we also try to employ more sophisticated estimations, such as the system GMM, to account for a lot of these issues. But off the bat, these are preliminary estimates. We understand that they have limitations, so we're not claiming to have the final word on this. And we are quite open to any suggestions to how they could be improved. So just to give you a taste of the findings, this is using the cross-sectional model. We find a positive correlation between statistical capacity score and the growth rate of GDP per capita. This is quite significant, and it stands whether we include the controls or not. In this table, we present our panel estimations. The first four columns are the random country and year fixed effects. As you can see, the statistical capacity score is positively correlated. We see a positive relationship with the growth rates. This seems to be stronger when we lag our statistical capacity score. I've not shown the results for country fixed effects, and we don't really get much results from them either. But as we know from studies such as Nickel 1991, that when you have a dynamic panel setup and you have country fixed effects, there's a good chance that you will have inconsistent estimates. And regardless of a system, GMM estimations takes care of this problem of this accounts for country fixed effects. So just to give you my rough idea of how to explain the system GMM estimation, essentially you estimate your equation in terms of differences and levels. In your differences equations, you instrument the endogenous variables by the lag levels. And for your levels equation, you instrument your endogenous variable with lag differences. Now, it's important to note, and this is well understood, that this is cross-country growth regressions. There's a fairly large literature on this, and the criticisms towards them are well-founded. So we understand these criticisms, but what we want to do is start off the conversation on relating the two, and hopefully future studies can show better internal validity of these results. So if you take our results to heart, what we find is that the fall in statistical capacity between 2005 and 2018 resulted in a loss in GDP per capita for the region from about 7 to 14%. Loss in GDP per capita. So now what I'm going to do is I'm going to provide two illustrations of the sort of data challenges we face in the region. Just note that this goes beyond the statistical capacity indicator, which is great, but it's not all encompassing. First is regarding gross public debt. We know that it's not reported consistently across countries. Many countries do not report several components of their debt. And you can imagine that this hinders a lot of efforts to analyze the macroeconomic fragility in the region. Same with the labor markets. We see inconsistent reporting of unemployment rates. These unemployment rates differ based on what definition is employed. And these differences are not necessarily innocuous. They matter for certain subgroups like gender. So in this first table, what I have is each row represents a subsector of the public sector, while the columns represent a country in the region. A check indicates that this country reports this particular type of debt. A cross indicates that the country has this type of debt but does not report it. Not applicable, and stroke A means the country does not have this type of debt. And a blank cell means we don't know. We don't know if this country has this type of debt, but we sure do know that they don't report it. And then one thing so what we show here is the unemployment measures used across the region. For the ILO definition of unemployment, you need to consider a number of things. One is if someone is without work, available for work, and seeking work. You also have to have a specific defined age group, which is 15 to 64. In terms of employment, you have to consider both paid and self-employment. Now, as you look across the region, some countries follow the definition in terms of unemployment and employment, some do not, and some use very different subsets of the population. So over here, what my colleagues and I tried to do was to see if we could reproduce the unemployment rates, the national estimates using the labor market panel surveys produced by the Economic Research Forum. And we were unable to. We found differences when we tried to do it for Egypt, Jordan, and Tunisia. The main issue with measuring unemployment is what definition you employ. And this really depends on whether you account for subsistence or not, and whether you account whether someone is actively seeking work or not. So the market definition does not consider subsistence. However, if you do consider subsistence, then you're using the extended definition of employment. When it comes to whether someone is actively seeking work or not, if you consider it, that's typically the standard definition of unemployment. If you don't, that's a broad definition of unemployment. And what definition you use matters quite a bit. So over here, what we do is we show female unemployment rates. This is for Egypt, Jordan, and Tunisia. We show the various unemployment rates using each of these definitions. The one thing to note is that if you use the market definition and you remove the actively searching requirement, the female unemployment rates are far higher than what the national estimates indicate. So that is my presentation on the issue, on the challenge of data transparency and economic growth in the region. The main takeaway is that data transparency or lack of data transparency may have cost the region in terms of growth. The ongoing pandemic has put this in the forefront. We need investments to build data capacity in the region. We also need the data to be shared more widely, and so data agreements are very important. Our immediate goal is to bring the data transparency challenge to the table, And we hope that future initiatives will dig deep into these issues, acknowledging country-specific contexts. So, thank you very much.
Thank you very much. That was a very interesting presentation, and I'm sure it will provoke extensive questions which participants can ask through the Zoom modality, the Q&A tab. But before that, we would ask, please, Dr. Tamar Gutner of the School of International Service to offer some comments. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Dr. Eisenstadt, and thank you, Dr. Islam, for your very great presentation from a very interesting and important report. And I'm a political scientist, so I really appreciate the opportunity to engage with economists. I found when I spent last year at the IMF, I was the only political scientist that I met in the building. And there's a lot of interest from economists to understand things that are inherently political. For example, what impact does violence have on economic growth, and some of the newer issues like gender and so on. So I think it's really good when we have these opportunities to engage with each other, and for you to engage with other policy-related actors that address some of these political issues like Transparency International, for example. So I think the report is important for a number of reasons. It really highlights the correlation between data transparency and economic growth. I'm not as convinced it explains causation, so that might be something worth discussing in the discussion. It highlights some of the challenges for countries to have more data transparency, including they may lack capacity, there may be other reasons. But when you're talking about the importance of data transparency to scholars and other international organization officials, you're basically preaching to the choir. It seems very sensible to us. Of course, you need more data transparency because it's important also to prevent crises, to respond to crises. It's important for a great many reasons. But my gentle criticism is that in some ways, your mechanisms can come off as naive. If the goal is to encourage countries to become more transparent in their data, in fact, they may not want to be more transparent, right? It may be in their political interest not to be more transparent, especially this idea of creating more trust. So you have an assumption more data transparency creates more trust, but it could also reveal that the government's not on top of things, or that it had been hiding information, or it's doing a poor job, or something's going wrong. So couldn't more transparency produce more dissatisfaction or even violence, right? So there are a number of countries, in fact, that are using the coronavirus pandemic to reduce transparency and to crack down on their civil society. And one example that's been in the news is Egypt, which has even ordered prison terms for people who contradict the government's account of the pandemic. And Egypt was very high in one of your charts as being more transparent. So now we're at a time where a number of countries may not have incentive to be more transparent with their data. And therefore, it's not just about you can't just assume more transparency equals more trust. It could have other effects as well that we should talk about. Also, this idea of that if you have more transparency, it helps civil society generate better policies and reforms. I don't think this is happening in some of the countries in your region. I don't think there is an open civil society that's allowed to have a voice. So that kind of thing, maybe we should discuss a little bit. Now, if we look to the political science literature, there has been exploration about how transparency is connected in complicated ways to democracy. We know that both terms have multiple dimensions. We know that there's overlap between them. There's even been work by economists like Stiglitz, 2002, that countries have incentives to restrict the flow of information. But there is also evidence that greater electoral competition is associated with greater transparency. So when you're trying to encourage governments to be more transparent and you're in a region where a number of them are not democracies. That creates another layer of challenges worth considering. So I would actually say, when I read your report and when I was thinking about it, I would actually predict we're going to see less transparency in the region, not more transparency. There was a report this week by the Eurasia Group that argued that in many regions in the world, the fact that there are lockdowns and emergencies are presenting opportunities for power grabs, particularly where democracy is weak or non-existent. So states are giving themselves more power to restrict movement and commerce. They're stifling criticism. They're giving themselves emergency powers. And when you start enacting things like contact tracing and facial recognition, then you're also reducing privacy. So how can you, as authors of important World Bank work that's trying to speak to governments in the region, how can you push the countries to become more transparent when in fact they may have incentives not to do so? And I just want to make a couple of suggestions about this. So first of all, there are broader attempts to do this. I'm not sure if you explored them in any depth. There's the Marrakesh Action Plan for Statistics, the MAPS, arguing that good statistics are important for better development results. There was the second International Roundtable on Managing for Development Results in 2004. There's the Global Action Plan from 2017, a high-level group that's related to the SDGs, talking about capacity building for statistics. There are the IMF fiscal guidelines and so on. So some of these are happening already, and it might be interesting engaging with some of those initiatives. I'm sure, I suspect there's even a whole bunch of other things the bank's already doing in various parts of the bank. The bottom line is it puts the bank or bank staff or fund staff or other IO staff, it's very tricky to directly criticize the governments who are your stakeholders. And we know that, right? We've seen criticism of the World Health Organization for not speaking out more against China's actions in the early days of the pandemic. We've seen the World Trade Organization say practically nothing when the US started a trade war. So it's a very uncomfortable position for an organization to be in. So therefore, in what ways can you have leverage to better get your message across? And I think one important solution is more collaboration with other international organizations with the same goals, but also with other scholars and NGOs who can be more critical, who have the ability to say things more critically. So I'm thinking Transparency International, for example. There's also the Open Government Partnership that was started under the auspices of the US. Maybe the World Bank's even involved with that. There's a development data partnership exercise with the bank and fund and IDB, but that I think is more about bringing private sector data into the picture. I think this moment in crisis, given that the bank is giving out loans left and right to help countries and the IMF has been giving out all of this kind of emergency funding, I think that gives the institutions more leverage as well. So in following the IMF, for example, the managing director has stressed a number of times that countries have to be accountable for ensuring that the emergency funds they're getting to respond to the pandemic are used as intended. And she said a number of times countries have to save the receipts. We have to know what you're doing with that money. And so this might be a good time to think about ways of engaging with different kinds of conditionality to have more leverage in encouraging more data transparency. And those are my basic comments, but I'm thinking, and maybe this will come up in discussion as well, but how can the conclusions of these reports, which sound so sensible, how can they have more leverage in trying to push for this kind of transparency that we in our audience can all agree is critically important today? You're muted.
Okay, thank you. Excellent commentary. And I think given that we're waiting for a flow of questions, we would ask Dr. Islam perhaps to respond directly. And then as we're also accumulating questions, maybe I'll throw on a few suggested by Dr. Gutner.
Dr. Gutner, thank you. Those are excellent comments and excellent suggestions. We agree, you're right. We are sort of preaching to the choir. But I also want to address some of your more specific comments. One regarding causation, I completely agree. It's very difficult to get causation out of cross-country growth regressions. But what I want to note is, given the empirical literature that exists, we do our best. We account for all sorts of institutions. We account for human capital. We account for various well-known determinants of economic growth. So we want to try and win the argument in the context of that literature. We understand the criticism that comes with it. It's a tough fight, but we think that at worst we'll get this into the agenda, or they get have people more and more people talking about it. The point on collaboration is well taken. We take this as one part of a larger puzzle, of a larger effort rather, on trying to get transparency pushed forward as an important issue. There are lots of other agencies working on this, and we are hoping that we're working in tandem to push this, especially for the region. The other point I want to note is that we've been very specific about what we look at in terms of data transparency. It's very hard working in the region when you're trying to get some basic facts, but you keep finding out that you can't find the data to tell you that's, if that's accurate or not. And you begin to question a lot of the things that are being said. So given that, we are really focused on the data transparency and availability agenda, specifically for how this information is produced. Now, as for the type of information in the current pandemic, I think it's really important to know how the pandemic is going across the countries. I think this requires a lot of demands on data, on transparency of the data. I think it's very difficult to predict how things might go, but we are understanding right now that more data has been more helpful in this situation. The political disincentives, well taken, it's a very good point. The transparency is a challenge not because it's easy. And so we expect that it's all going to require some sort of big effort on our parts to push this agenda forward. So I think I've covered most of the main points. Happy to address more if I missed anything.
All right, Dr. Gutner, any response or rejoinder?
No, I mean, I appreciate that you're trying your best, so I'm not being critical of that. I just, I would like to hear what the audience says about the issue of correlation versus causation. And I absolutely agree on the importance, of course, and I can just give an example. A long time ago in my first career as a financial journalist in London with the Wall Street Journal, I was there at a time where Britain was experiencing higher unemployment. So they changed how they changed the data that they used in the employment figures. So they decided if you're over a certain age, you must be retired. And if you're under a certain age, you must be a student. So I remember that from a long time ago that what's calculated, these are also political decisions, and how you compare the data from different countries can be very challenging to know what to do with it.
Okay, I think we have questions starting to come in. As they do, I wonder if I could use the moderator's prerogative a little bit and just follow up. I think that the question about the effects of transparency on growth may also be reflecting other structural issues behind the transparency. That is transparency sort of an indicator of some other underlying factor that is really the one that is significant? Now you tested for several controls. I wonder though, if some of the governance indicators that you use as controls, if you use those without using transparency, if they might be significant themselves. That is transparency really part of a bundle of variables that, together are really about governance, and that maybe is having the effect on growth rather than sort of transparency itself. So I guess that's a little more of a technical question, but I wonder if I could also follow up directly on Dr. Gutner's point about sort of the policy implications for countries where you're trying to get better data, and for reasons which you very compellingly demonstrated in areas like unemployment and debt. It seems that, you know, the typical carrots and sticks are sort of what exist, and that the World Bank, and perhaps particularly the IMF, as we've read historically, have the leverage of linking, you know, sort of financing to receipt of governance, or in this case, why not receipt of better transparent data? I mean, it is evident that this data would help a lot in establishing improved economic forecasting, for example, which would enable better and more precise lending in the future. So it seems very logical that linkages could be established in addition to the kinds of cooperation in data collection agreements that are starting to exist at the international level, as Dr. Gutner mentioned. So I know that this might be putting you on a spot, that you're, you know, that you're not in the policy area, you're in the research area. And I, having been at the World Bank recently myself as a fellow, I know the distinction very starkly. But nonetheless, since I'm not at the World Bank now, I thought I maybe could ask this question. And you know, so I guess there's those two questions, and then we'll start to take a few more from the audience. To you, Dr. Islam.
Thank you, Dr. Eisenstadt. Very good points, well taken. So a few things on regarding the cultural component or the cultural variables that we important determinants. Point well taken. These are very preliminary estimations. We intend to actually have more robust estimations as we go forward. We're going to try and explore the identification more carefully. We're going to expose our findings to a huge number of battery of checks. So this is still preliminary, right? We intend to account for as much as we can. The issue on the policy implications, how to incentivize, I think showing the connection between transparency as we have defined it and economic growth hopefully will create some incentives to show that there is some mechanism illustrating some pathways through which this could leverage and create or enlarge in the pie of an economy, I think is important. I think to show to our government that it's to their best interest to have this happen and improves economic growth is one way of pushing the agenda of transparency. So that's how I think that's the agenda we're trying to push, and I think that's one way to address it. The one comment I realized on the statistical capacity indicator is, do note that the statistical capacity indicator as it stands only looks at developing economies. Just to pitch in right now, the upcoming World Development Report on data from the World Bank will produce a new indicator that actually encompasses all advanced economies too. So just keep an eye out for that. So given, when you see Egypt performing well, it's performing well within a narrow set. And also, as you've seen the issues of debt and labor unemployment that we raised, there's still a lot of issues when you go beyond the statistical capacity indicator.
Okay, all right, thank you. It seems that we have a question. It's actually a statement, but I think the part for the commentary from Dr. Islam might be in relation to a statement that, you know, a lot of education and social marketing are needed starting early in the acculturation of a person's life in the very early grades in order to sort of get them to be interested and understand the importance of transparency and data sharing. That perhaps, you know, maybe this just isn't part of the political culture in many countries. Perhaps, I don't know if it so much could be part of the political culture as maybe, perhaps as Dr. Gutner said, you know, sort of different regimes have different interests in levels of transparency. So maybe that would be part of the question. But still, the issue of, you know, early education and, as the questioner calls it, quote, social marketing. I don't know, would you have any comments about that?
Human capital investments are important. We know more from the recent literature that early childhood education has been seen to be very important for human capital as well. Definitely, it's crucial for many economists to improve economic growth. We try to account for it as best as we can in our estimations, so that we make sure that we're not missing this important link.
Okay, all right, thank you.
I can add something here too. I mean, I do like that about the report, that the argument that you're making of the correlation, or, you know, the connection between transparency and growth is a good message, in the sense that it sounds technical. It doesn't sound like you're not telling countries they have to be more democratic. You're telling them if they want more growth, they have to have more data transparency, right? You're arguing that. So in a way, it doesn't sound to, you know, what's the word, infringing on sovereignty, or going above the World Bank's mandate. It's just a kind of an economic point that you're making. So in that sense, I think that's a very important message. It's just, I think the three mechanisms, out of the three mechanisms, two of them come across as, you know, not that convincing.
Okay, any comment, Dr. Islam? Or shall I move on?
No, point well taken, understood. But which two mechanisms exactly were you less convinced by?
The second two. One of them is on how it's very helpful for civil society so that they can engage when many of your countries they can't engage, and the other one, that it's important to build trust when you know, in some places it could build anger.
Okay. So to clarify the 2 points, right? So one, regarding the engagement of civil society, we actually meant something broader. This also means engagement of more researchers. So we know there's a literature out there that showed that if you look at published papers in economics, they tend to skip a lot of developing economies. And I think they also far less in a lot of the developing MENA region, right? So you have the forefront, the boundaries of academic knowledge being very specific to very advanced economies, right? So the question what we want to do is that, well, to put it another way, if you don't have the data, you won't do research for that country, right? You're constrained with what data you have. So we are trying to make that salient point. You want the best of minds working on your country. You want them to debate and actually encourage this. We also hope that, you know, civil society will be engaged. We see this as an optimistic whole, essentially, an ecosystem, as you will. We don't think that it's a silver bullet that will happen. But we are trying to envision a situation where this results in very good outcomes. The third channel we had was on the difference of growth and perceptions. And this is one area we're working on right now. We're trying to see if countries that have low data transparency and availability is affecting what you see, the perceptions are, and what actually you document through various sets of surveys and so forth. So this is a literature we are getting into quite heavy right now, and we're going to see what sort of results we get out of it. Stay tuned.
I guess a point of clarification, you presented results from the MENA region, which you showed us perhaps had some of the worst transparency and actually a change in the negative direction from 2005 to 2018. I wonder if you've done this for the rest of the world and what those findings might be. Whether you, I mean, they're fairly strong here, and it's a fascinating study. I guess I wonder whether these apply to the other parts of the world as well, or whether you know or have plans for that.
So the figure has regional averages across the world. The limitation is it's only the developing world, because that's what the statistical capacity indicator has. As you can see, the MENA region is the only one to have dropped in the score, right?
Yeah.
Many of the other regions that were below in 2005 or ranked lower than MENA actually improved. What we're missing from the picture is advanced economies, but that is a data constraint, and hopefully in future indicators will include that too.
And so, okay, so the regression is worldwide, the developing world.
Yeah.
Okay, and okay, great. Any other questions, comments? I believe our audience doesn't have any more questions, although if they do, they can send them in the next few seconds. Okay. If not, I guess.
No, I have some students in the audience, so I would very much like my students to ask a question or two.
Oh, we have another one, the pressure of the professor. All right, how are trust and transparency defined in this research, and what infrastructure is needed? It says what infrastructure is needed to build infrastructure, but I guess perhaps the question really would be, you know, what is, just in general, what is needed to build infrastructure? Dr. Islam. What transparency is needed to build infrastructure? I'm sorry.
So what we use for our technical analysis is the statistical capacity indicator. This encompasses both the availability, the reliability, and the periodicity of data. This ranges from microdata as well as key macro socioeconomic indicators. So that is what we have defined our data availability and transparency as it stands. Now, I think the second question is what it takes to build a better data infrastructure in the country. That's how I'm interpreting it. So apologies if I have this wrong. And essentially, a number of things come into play. One, you need to produce really good data. This can come in a wide range of forms, from household surveys, firm level surveys, labor force surveys, and then coming also in the form of census, right? So that's the beginning. Second, you need to make sure the quality of this data is really good. And thirdly, you have to make sure that it's not existing in a silo, that's actually open, at least to some extent, for researchers to be involved and to be engaged in it, so they can produce valuable information and the right kinds of debates. So this is what we envision as the kind of infrastructure and ecosystem that's needed.
I guess that just begs a further question, because one part of it is getting good data, and the other part is, if you're going to expect contributions from civil society, making it fully available, because sometimes regimes like to collect good data but keep it for themselves. So I guess the question also is, how will this data become more readily available if you want participation in processes such as, you know, participatory budgeting and some of the other sort of exercises of citizenship and public planning that perhaps are important.
Yes, point well taken. I think availability of data accessibility is crucial in the region, and it's crucial for our story to happen. We know that various data agreements have arisen with many countries to have the data more shareable and so forth.
Okay, all right, thank you. Any final comments from Dr. Gutner, Dr. Islam?
I guess this discussion made me think of one more question, which would be, today when the emphasis, you know, the question is, what kind of support will there be to help countries try to develop stronger data transparency capacity? Because now we really need fiscal policy focus more on health infrastructure. We have countries in the region facing famine. You know, there are these huge issues. So what are the prospects of countries getting more support, either through new mechanisms or existing mechanisms?
Okay, Dr. Islam.
Yes, this is a very important point. So, and I might not have a comprehensive view on this, but essentially we know that the World Bank has provided a lot of technical assistance to help with a lot of data collection initiatives over the year. We know that a lot of think tanks, institutions like the Economic Research Forum has been great at filling in some of the data gaps. And this is the type of efforts we want to push forward going in. And yeah.
Okay, anything else? Then if not, I guess I want to thank both of our speakers. I want to recommend to you the report upon which these discussions have been based, How Transparency Can Help the Middle East and North Africa. And just to encourage everyone to, you know, wash their hands and get good data, okay? So thank you very much for wonderful presentations and the provocation. And we hope to see you soon and to hear more about the development of this research, which I think is just at the beginning stages with your fascinating findings that it sounds like you're going to take to multiple levels. So thank you very much to Dr. Asif Islam, Dr. Tamar Gutner, and to our audience for joining us today. Have a good day.
Thank you.